Welcome to my studio. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this elegant garden. And in addition to showing you how I put all this together, I'm going to cover a few techniques like a faux marble paint technique that I've used on the balustrades. I'm also going to show you how to make urns, very elegant urns using pots and clay and other things. And then I'm also going to show you how to make a fountain and a pond and create some faux water so it looks very realistic. So let's get started. The base for the garden comes in a kit. It measures 9 by 9 square and it's 5 pieces, sides, 4 sides and a top, and so it's very easy just to put together and glue. And then to cover the base, the top and the sides, I chose this really pretty scrapbook paper that I thought was very elegant and floral. And so I covered the tops and then the sides. To bring in more of a garden element to the base, I decided to add these squares made of grass scrapbook paper. And the squares are 2 1/4 inches by 2 1/4 inches. And I mounted them on chipboard and then cut them into the individual pieces. Now to find the center point of the base, which is the way you need to start so that everything comes out even, you need to measure the center point on each side. And if you look at the first picture, you can see a red dot that the arrow is pointing to. So I marked that place on each side, so all 4 sides. And since it's a 9-inch base, it's 4.5 inches is the midpoint. And then once you get all 4 midpoints on each side, then you can draw lines from midpoint to midpoint, and that will give you your center point. So in the second picture, you can see the pencil markings where I have found the center point and marked that with a pencil. Now your lines are all going to get covered up with the square, so you don't have to worry about that. Then the next picture down below, you can see how I have attached one of the squares in the diamond position to the very center. So I've used those lines to help me center that first piece. So once you get that down, now you can use that to add all the other pieces off of each edge. And you just keep doing that until you get all 9 pieces in place. Now you'll notice in the last picture that the ends are going to hang over. I just decided that to try to cut these in some tiny little measurement on a cutting board is just too hard to do. It's a pain. So that's why I just picked 2 1/4 inches because I thought that looked pretty good. And you'll have just that tiny bit that hangs over and you can just snip that off. For the trellis, I started with a chipboard die cut trellis that's cut to look like a old Victorian trellis. And then I painted it with acrylic paint. The color is a Delta Cream Coat medium Victorian teal, so it's kind of a teal color. I painted it on both sides, and then to accommodate the fountain, which I decided I needed to make it a little bit more weighty and to dress it up a little bit and to make it more in proportion with the pond, I decided to add this Victorian piece. It's a frame, and I think it's made out of resin, which just comes white. And so the first thing I did was I rubbed it with some beige, kind of a beige paint, and then with copper gilder's paste. And then you'll notice behind the opening I've used the same paper that I used for the garden base. Now to create the combination fountain and pond, I've used another resin piece that's made to be a wall fountain. And I also used a box, just a paper mache box that had this embossed pattern around the outside, which I thought would look really pretty as a base for the fountain and a pond. To paint the pieces, I wanted to give them a very weathered look. And so for both pieces, I first started with painting the entire piece a pewter gray. Once that dried, then I used a stencil brush to stipple on the country gray color, the lighter gray, and I didn't cover all of the dark gray. Just, that dark gray you can see is still kind of in the little creases on the fountain. And then after that, I rubbed all of it with hot cocoa liquid pearls, and you can see all the raised bits. You can see kind of the coppery looking color of that. And then the final touches, I kind of looked at it and said, okay, where would there be moss? Where would it be getting green? And since there will be water coming out of the fountain's face, or the mouth there, and into the basin below, I put rubbed some of that greenish color in the back part, would be underneath the flow of water, and then just around the basin. And I did the same thing. I don't think you see it as well in the picture here, but I did the same thing with the base. It's painted the same way with the same color scheme, and then around the lip of the pond part, the paper mache box, I again rubbed some more of the green. For the area inside the pond, I started by adding some coarse sand and some pebbles, and to start building up the bottom. It's a pretty deep box or paper mache box. So I didn't want to use a lot of the product to try to fill it up. So I started by putting, I'd say almost half, maybe a little bit more than half of the area of the bottom I filled with the coarse sand and the stones. Now the coarse sand, I thought it served two purposes. One, it filled in a lot of the little gaps between the pebbles, and then also, you know, it kind of gave a sandy bottom, so it's like a combination of stones and the sand. So as I put that in layers, I added glossy accents between each layer, so just enough just to barely cover it, so that way it's kind of glued in place. And then I put down more sand and more pebbles, and you can also kind of shake the box a little bit so the pebbles become embedded in the sand. And then so I just kept doing that until I filled up a little bit more than half of the box, and with continuing to put more and more glossy accents as I went. And then we're going to use the glossy accents to do all the faux water. So once I got it raised up enough that I liked the level of the bottom of the pond, now you can choose to do this however high you want, then I started putting some elements in the bottom that you might see. And I've got a little glass fish that's from my stash, and I also have some of this mossy looking stuff that I've put in the bottom of that. And then again, just started adding some more glossy accents. And what you're going to do is you're just going to keep adding layer after layer after layer. You don't want each layer to be too deep or it'll take forever to dry. And then you'll notice I want to point out by the fish is a bubble. Now you can decide if you want to keep your bubbles or you want to get rid of them. If you don't want the bubbles, then just poke them with a pin and they'll pop. And you might find as you are doing it through the layers, if there's any pockets of air, that those bubbles will rise up. So you just kind of want to keep an eye on it for the first, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes while it's drying to see if you don't want your bubbles. Then just keep an eye on it and see if there's any of the bubbles coming up. And so once you let each layer dry, you just keep on building layer and layer until you get ready to hook the fountain into the pond. This is one of the urns that I made for the garden, or some people might call it a planter. And I'm going to show you how I put this together. What I did is I took a pot, a clay pot, and a wooden pot, and I used the wooden pot as the base and then the clay pot for the top. To decorate the pot, I added some dimensional elements to it. I added pieces of Dresden, so you can use anything you want that is bulky. You could use stickers, you could use metal pieces, anything that you had that would create a design, and you don't care what it looks like. So if it's ugly, it doesn't matter, you're going to paint over it. And then the other main thing that I used is clay pieces, and I'll show you how I made those. Now I use this mold, and you can see here I have I've already put some clay in here, and I'm going to show you why in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is show you how I do the clay. So if you're not familiar with paper clay, or you haven't seen me do this before on a video, I'll just show you how I do this. Now I use Creative Paper Clay, and you can find this stuff everywhere. And of course Alpha Stamps carries it. And I'm going to take out some clay. I take out, you know, more than you need, because you can put the excess back. And then I kind of roll it up and then push it into the mold. Now, something that's a little bit different about this, or a suggestion I would make, since we're going to be wrapping this around this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you get rid of the excess so that you have a really clean piece that you don't have to do a lot of sanding to, because it's a little harder to sand the clay when it's bent, and it's a little bit more delicate. So if you watch me, I'm just kind of pulling off the excess with my finger like this. And you can also take a roller or a ruler and press that on there to make it flat, just to get that all flattened out, and then you can go back and start pulling more of it off until you get it all off, and you get a nice clean area there where you don't have a lot of hangover. And then once I pull off all the excess, then you can go back in and just kind of brush the little fine stuff back into the mold area, and you can give it another go with a brayer or whatever flat item you're using. And now you're going to get a nice clean a clean piece of clay that doesn't really need maybe no sanding or very little. Now over here I've got the actual one that we're using, and the way I would do this, you're going to want to take this out before it's dry. And so I would let this dry for a little bit. Mine's not quite as dry as I would like it to be, but just a little bit. Don't dry it enough that we can't bend it, but dry it enough that it pops out of here more easily. And if you were not going to bend it, you could just leave it in here to dry, unless you needed it to come out because you needed to make other things. So here I've got the piece, and you'll notice I just kind of bent this and kind of got the edges up and just kept working around it until I lifted it up. So here's our piece. Now the next thing we'll want to do is to put this on the pot so that it'll shape exactly to the pot. If we didn't do this, even if you tried to just shape it yourself, as the clay dries, it's going to warp and it wouldn't be the same shape. So what I do is I just put it on the pot and I just leave it there, say for, I don't know, maybe an hour, and I just kind of watch it until the skin of this starts to get dry, and you can tell because it'll become more of a white color. So once the skin is dry, now it's safe to wrap it with a piece of paper towel like this over it. Now this paper towel is going to hold it down really nicely, and it's also going to help draw the moisture out. But I wouldn't have wanted to do that while it's as wet as it is right now, because doing this, and then you'll want to put a rubber band loosely, enough where it's holding it but it's not digging into the paper towel. If I do this before it gets too dry, it's going to smash the image on the front of it, the raised area. So let that dry just a little bit. Once you put it on, a little bit while it's in here to pull it out, then a little bit as you bend it around here, and then wrap this up with a paper towel. And then you're going to leave it probably overnight. Now when you take it out, you might find that it has a little bit of wetness in the back. You might see in this area back here that it looks a little bit damp, just a little bit here. That's okay, go ahead and glue it on your pot. You're still in good shape. So I took glossy accents and I just glue this right onto the pot. It won't come off, and it'll continue to dry right behind there, but it won't change anything with your piece. And then I did that 3 times around, all the way around the pot. And don't worry if you've got glue or it looks messy, because you'll paint the whole thing. Now if this had come out rough, you'll want to come in once you pull it off the pot and it's pretty much dry and you're ready to glue it on permanently. You might want to come in with a file and just clean up any little areas that are rough or that don't, have a little excess of the clay. So once you've done that, then you'll go ahead and start to paint your pot. And I used a combination of 4 different colors to do this. And they are, first I painted the entire thing with this nutmeg brown. So I painted all of the outside as well as some of the inside, anything like right inside the lip. And then the next color I came in with this is called raw sienna. So that's what I use next. And with the raw sienna, all I did was stipple on the raw sienna with a stencil brush, just stippling on, and then wiping it just slightly just to blend it, and so you don't see the roundness of the brush when you're stippling. And then after that, I didn't, when I stipple, I don't cover all of the darker brown. Just, you can see there's a lot of the reddish in here. Just enough to add the red and still leave some of the brown. And then after that, I came in with patina gilder's paste. And this is just to kind of pull out some of the you can see here, some of the color. It's kind of a teal color, just to bring out some of the raised areas, and I want it to look like almost like it was copper and it was weathered. And then after I went over it with that, then I went over it with this verdigris, the greener color, and I wiped that over it. So what you're seeing is a combination of that teal color and that green color. Now for the inside, what I did was I stuffed it with styrofoam. So I just cut up a bunch of pieces of styrofoam and stuffed it in here until it was tight. And that's going to give me a way to stick everything into it. And then before I actually started adding all the things, I put a little glue in here, stuck the styrofoam in, then I came in and just painted it with some green. That way, even after I put the moss in, you wouldn't see any little bits of white peeking through. Once I got all that done, then I came in with some moss. And this is just a sheet moss. It comes in a sheet and you can break it apart and fill it all in. After that, then I added my lady here growing out of the pot. And the lady comes from these collage sheets. These are 2 new sheets that I have. These are people, men and women from the 1830s. And there's also lots of butterflies. So there's 2 of these sheets, and they both have the same types of things on them, but different ladies and different men. And so that's where the ladies come from. And I'm only using part of the body. I just keep enough of the body that I can stick it down into the pot. And you can either leave a break in your styrofoam so that it slips in there, or you can cut a slit into your styrofoam so that that thing can stick in through there. Now that styrofoam also gave me a way to stick in the flowers that you see on the front. So of course they're on a stem. I don't know if it's like that. They're on a stem, so they'll stick right in there. And you see she is holding a butterfly wand. The butterfly comes from the sheet. This is just a toothpick painted gold, and then I've got a little bead on the top. And then of course I've made these leaves. These are clay leaves. I'll show you that in a minute. And then I've put butterflies, and I just use craft wire to glue them onto the wire and then stick the wire down inside there. Now for these leaves I used a different mold. It's this mold here. And there's also, Alpha Stamps carries a couple of smaller versions of this mold with different kind of leaves on it, so that way, you know, depending on the size of your project. So these are really nice because you can just produce as many leaves as you want. Now with this, I kind of did the same thing as I did for the decorative piece on the urn. I let this dry a little bit on the back, and you can see I've tried to clean it up as close as I could to the edges. And you'll notice here all my leaves are bent. And the way you do this is you bend this while it's wet. It wants to warp anyway. So you see I'm doing the peeling it out. So when you take it out of the mold, just bend it however you want. And then let it dry like that. And you might want to check it every once in a while, just make sure it stays bent. So just however you want to manipulate it, and then let it dry that way. And then I came in with these leaves and I painted them first with this green. It is a leaf green, and then this green here I used to use my finger and rubbed it on top of all the raised areas. I can show you better here. I've got a loose one. So I painted it first with the leaf green, and then I rubbed with my finger on all the raised areas with the this is celery green. So those are 2 colors I used for that. Now, in terms of other pots that I made this one as well. This is a smaller clay pot, and it's the same wooden one that I used for the larger urn. On this one, I just simply twisted a bunch of little rosebuds together with their stems, just kept adding a rosebud, twisting. And then this leafy stuff came off of a vine. And then, of course, the roses again, and then the moss in there. But you notice I have a little bit different decoration on this. This is another clay piece that I made from this mold here. And it's actually this one. I did the same thing as I did with the other decorative piece. I put it in there, and this one is really important that you clean this up as much as you can, because it's a little bit harder to sand in these little areas. Again, I let it dry a little bit on the back. I pulled it out. I wrapped it around my pot. I let it dry a little bit. Then I wrapped it with the paper towel. Now I've got some Dresden on here, just the same one as I used on the other pot, but something different is I've used fabric, or I'm sorry, trim. So this is just gold trim. So you can see you can use ribbon, you can use any kind of lace, anything that has any bulk or design to it. The only thing you want to be careful with this is as you paint it, you don't want to fill in all the holes so that you lose the detail of the trim. And then I just used a couple of different beige colors on this, a darker one, a lighter one, and then I just rubbed this with, it's Gilder's paste again, just like this, except it's a copper color. So that's the only difference. You're going to see me use some other molds as well. Of course, I used this one for the pot. You're going to see me use this one as well. And then, of course, I use this one as a sample, and there's another one too. So Alpha Stamps is carrying all these molds, these Baroque type molds, as well as the leaf molds and this decorative mold. Now, tip on your paper clay, the way I store it, because it will dry out if you're not careful, even if you think it's in a sealed bag. You know, I roll this up tight, rubber band it, I stick it in a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag, and then get all the air out of this bag. So once you get all the air out of this bag, you know, get that as tight as you can, rubber band it and stick it in another bag. In the last bag that you stick it in, add a little water. That way there's moisture inside of the bag and your stuff won't dry out. Now on the sides of the garden, I'm using a balustrade that's made out of die-cut chipboard, and I've done a marble paint treatment on it, and so I'm going to show you how I did that. Now what you'll need is just a cup with some water in it to put your paintbrushes in. I use this little lid and have a little water in that. Then I'm using 4 colors. There is kind of 2 different colors of beige. There's a darker one called Butter Pecan. There's a lighter one called Antique White. Then there is a gray, which I'll find that in a second here, and there's Warm White, as you can see there. And then there is Country Gray. Now for this technique you can use however many colors you want. You probably want to at least use 3. And then you can see that I have the whatever surface you want to put these on to work with them. And then in this little cup I have a little bit of white paint, which I'm going to thin just a little bit. Maybe just a little too much. You want it to be thinner than the other paint, the way it comes out of the... So I don't know if you can see that. It almost drips. This might be something that you want to practice a little bit with to get it to the right thickness. We're going to use this one for the veining. And then I have 3 brushes. One brush I'm going to use to apply these colors. One brush I'm going to use to blend the colors. And this brush with a really tiny end to it is going to be used to put the veining on. And then in addition to the brushes, you'll need some just Kleenex. Just nice cotton Kleenex. And here I have a piece of it that's going to be used in the front. So this is what we're going to do. And I'm just going to do it on a larger piece of chipboard so that it's easier for you to see how to do it. And you might want to just make up some of these for yourself and practice on them before you paint whatever you're going to paint. Now this technique, you can use it on something as small as the balustrade here, or you can use it on something much larger, like a if you like altar books, or if you want to paint your walls, or some decorative piece of furniture, whatever it is, you just scale it up for what we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to do is start by applying. I'm going to get my brush just a little bit wet. And it needs just to be a little damp, not really wet, just damp. So it's not dripping. You know, if I touch it, it's wet, just a little bit wet. Then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pick up my first color. Does not matter what order. It's all up to you. And I'm going to start making swirls, and I'm going to flip my brush as I do across the white area here. Pick up some more paint, and I'm doing it at a diagonal. And I don't know if you can see how I'm twisting my brush as I pull it across. So you're getting more of a jagged look as opposed to a smooth look. I don't want to paint this, so what you might want to do is start on one side so that you get it to the edge and then go across like that and then come off. And then that way you know you got it all. And this doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be blended. And there you go. Looks messy, but it'll turn into something like that. So I'm just going to come back in here and make sure my brush is damp again. I don't have to worry about taking color off, nothing like that. I'm just going to take a little of the excess off, and then I'm going to come in and grab my next color. So that's on there, and I'm just going to go in the areas that I have not gone in before, and I'm just going to turn and twist, pick up more paint, turn and twist. And you can see I'm running into the other. That's cool too. Turn and twist. The same thing. See? So I'll come back in here, pick up a little bit more water, and now I'm going to come in with the gray. And I like the gray with the beige because it gives you a little contrast, like a darker contrast, so that it's not all beiges. And you do not have to fill in every little space here, just because you're going to blend it, so you don't have to worry if there's a little white. And we actually are going to want some of the white to show up when we're done. Just wherever you want it. Okay, so now we've got our first layer on, or this might be your last layer depending on what you like. And in the meantime, while I'm working, I might need to come back to this to add more color if I want to adjust, so I just leave it in this water so that it doesn't dry out and the paint doesn't stick to the brush. Now I'm going to come in, I'm going to pick up some more water, just like you did before. You just want it a little damp, and now I'm just going to come in here and blend this, and I'm just swirling it. You see how I'm doing this? I'm just kind of like I applied it. But I'm just kind of blending them together. And if you feel like your brush is getting a little dry, pick up a little bit more water. You see I've got paint on it. That's okay. You don't have to take anything off. You're just going for this blended look. A little more paint or a little bit more water. If you do need to wash your brush for some reason, you've got your big container of water. And I'll do that until all the edges are smooth. Now at this point I'm going to come in with a Kleenex and ball it up a little bit, and then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to lightly touch it, very lightly. And do this while the paint is wet, or you won't get any of it to come up into your, so you can see you want a little bit of it to come up. And you see the real marbly looking effect that we're getting. Now, you look at this and you say, do I like it? Is it good? Well, I'm looking at it, and if you look at my sample, it's got a little too much gray in it. So now I can come back in with my brush again, and I can add more of the other color to kind of damp down the gray. So I'm going to put a little bit more of the lighter color, and I'm going to run it where the gray is. just so I take that down a bit. Now you could use more than 4 colors, but personally I think it gets a little muddy. And I'm come back in and I'm going to blend a little bit. You see, just swirling it around, twisting it. And come now in and pull a little bit of that off. And now it's not quite as gray as it was. Now I'm going to let that dry. And since you've done this, since you've been pulling this off, it shouldn't take too long to do that. You see we're pulling up enough that I'm actually exposing a little bit of the white, which is good too. So now we'll just let that dry. One more thing I want to mention before we move forward to the veining is that if you're working on something larger in particular, you want to keep that paint wet until you're done and to this point. Because if you don't keep it wet, then you can't blend it. So either you need to practice this enough where you can work very fast, or you'll need to come back in and go over your lines with just a little bit of wet, a little bit of damp brush just to keep it wet. Now you may decide at this point that I like that, I don't want to do anything else. Or you may want to go in and add some fine veining, and that's what we're going to use the white that I have diluted a little bit with water to keep it really wet, and the tiny brush. Now I stand up to do this because I think it just works better, and this has to be a very herky-jerky, not smooth, not swirly motion, and the best way to do that, I think, is to put it in your opposite hand. So don't put it in the hand you normally use, because that will force you to be jerky. So you want to get some paint on your brush, and then you want to come in and just jerk. And I'm telling you, you can't help it. And you're just going to make these weird jerky motions. And you're going to add your veining. And I don't have to do much to jerk like this, just basically try to have some control, and I can't. And then come back in and lift up with your towel or with your Kleenex. And if you want more or you want finer, you know, pick up less paint, just come in. Whoop, don't want that much. And just come in, just add some little stuff. And that way you get a little bit finer. Now at this point, let's say, oh, I hate that. I just hate that. You can come in and start over. You can either add your colors back, you can paint this all white, you can just start over and do something different. And no two will ever come out the same, obviously. They'll always be different. That's another reason to try to work the piece, if you can, as quickly and all at once, so that there's some cohesion in it, so that you don't end up with one section looking totally different than another section. So just continue until you have what you want. If you look here, you can see what I have here. Now when you're working with a piece like this, you're going to want to pretend like it's solid. So you don't want to come in and just do these little things here, or just apply your paint. You want to pretend like this whole thing is solid, and you want to go all the way across, applying your colors, pat all the way across, blend all the way across, and then do your veining all the way across. Otherwise, you're going to get a really funny look. So these, like I say, these open things, just act like this is a solid piece. And then just like you saw at the beginning of this, I would prime whatever you're going to use first with like a white gesso, or I just use white paint, that's fine. Anything that's not going to, so that you have a barrier between your paint and a paper product like this, because if you don't, it's going to just absorb your paint. Your paint won't stay wet, it won't hold its colors. So whatever you're doing, you want to first get, say, a white coat on it, and or whatever color. If you want some other color to kind of come through as you're pulling it up, then use some other color, but just you need a barrier between whatever you're painting and these colors that you're using. So that's it. One of the other elements that I'm creating for the garden is a couple of benches, and I want to show you how I made these. There is a set of this ironwork, chipboard ironwork, scroll work that is carried by Alpha Stamps. These are just a few of the pieces. It comes with quite a few pieces, and this is a long one. I've just cut it up. And it comes with these types of pieces. So I looked at this and I thought, well, I bet I could cut this up and create a bench with it. So I just wanted to point out to you, if you do this, which pieces I used. So you see we have a seat right here. So that is this section right here. This square section is what you need for that. And then if you look at the back, it's the square section plus these pieces here. So you would take another square section from this strip with these three pieces here. And then the sides, you see here, are the same thing. It's this section right here. So try to lay this out here. See if I can put something behind it so it's up, so you can see it. So, can you see that with the camera? Okay. So this is the seat, the square right here. The square with these is the back. And then one section of these in the center, I guess, if you look at that. So you want a section in the center where you get the whole straight piece. You want this section here where you cut here and here. And those, you need two of those to create the sides of your bench. And then I just glued it all together and painted it. And there are other pieces come with it. So you might decide that you want to cut it up a little bit differently and create the same thing. But basically you need two sides that act as feet. So you need a flat area, you need a back and a seat. And that makes a bench. Now you can see I've glued the fountain onto the frame, and then I've started doing work on creating the water that's going to be coming out of the lion's mouth and into the basin. And you can see you have this stream of water coming out, and then you see the water ponding inside of the basin. Now before you do that, you want to make sure that you glue this to the back of this, because you need all this to be level, and you need this to dry level in the basin or whatnot. So I think it makes it easier if you just go ahead and glue the fountain to the back here. Now let me show you how I made this stream of water. What you're going to need is you're going to need some kind of clear plastic, and as heavy as you can get. Now not so heavy it won't bend, but maybe a little heavier than transparency film. It's this little too thin. A lot of times in packaging of craft supplies and stuff like that, you get plastic pieces like this. So it needs to be clear, and what you're going to do is you're going to cut a very thin piece off of this, and I hope you can see this in my hand, how thin this is. As thin as what you see the water coming through. And the reason we need this is we need something that's stiff to support this. If we're going to use glossy accents to create all the water features, but if we just tried to use the glossy accents, it's bendable, but it's too bendable, so it would just flop down. It wouldn't give you this arched spray. So if we put this in the middle of the glossy accents, then we will have a nice arched spray. So cut your piece and cut it longer than you need it. So you might want to just kind of look at how much do you need for it to come out of the mouth. And if you're doing some other fountain, whatever your fountain is, to come out of the mouth and go down into the basin. And you do want it to go down into the basin. And actually, when you put it in there, because this thing is bendable, it's actually going to stay in there without you even gluing it. You'll have to glue it to the lion's mouth, but when you stick this down there, it'll just naturally stay like this. And then you can start filling your basin. So anyway, what we're going to do is put that down on a non-stick craft sheet. Don't use anything else that will stick to. Don't use wax paper, because if you do, it will pick up the wax on your glossy accents and it'll be muddy looking. And then, if you use tin foil, a lot of other things, plastic, it's going to stick to it and won't come off. So I'm going to take my glossy accents and I'm just going to run a bead right along this piece. And I'm going to let that dry. and then I'm going to flip it over and do to the same side. Now don't worry if some of it falls off the edge or whatever, because the nice thing about glossy accents is you can come in with a pair of scissors and trim it. And as a matter of fact, on the one I made in there, I did have some overrun, no problem. I just came in and trimmed it right up to go right along the plastic, and I got this nice strip. And the glossy accents kind of hides the fact that it's plastic, and it looks more like it's real water. Now, the other thing that we want to do to the fountain, once you get that in there, once you glue your piece in here and it's sticking down inside the basin, then we're going to want to start filling the basin up with glossy accents, just a little bit at a time, letting it dry. You can see my last application is still drying because it's a little smoky still, but that should dry clear. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to run some sections of glossy accents over the edge of this, and we're going to want to add more here so that it looks like the water is falling out of the basin into our pond down here. Now in the case of that, you don't need it to be stiff because you don't need it to spray out. You want it to just fall, and that's what the glossy accents will do when we add it on here. So to do that, you need to figure out what is the distance between here and whatever your basin is, and you want it to be longer so that it goes into the water, not just stops at where the highest water level is, but goes into the water. So again, make it longer than you need it to be because you can always trim it. So to do that, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to start with a non-stick craft sheet, and you're just going to make some pieces that are going to be part of that waterfall. Now, what I'm doing, I'm not just making one piece, I'm just making several pieces that are going to fall over. So I'm going to assume that it's not level and it doesn't all spill over equally. It'll spill over at just different points. And you just want to make a long string. And the way I'm doing mine is I'm making a little wider at the top and then going down and making it narrow at the bottom. And like I said, make it long enough that you can trim. And just add a lot of glossy accents. Now, if you don't think it's thick enough, because when it dries, it's going to shrink. If you don't think it's thick enough, then after the first coat dries, just add some more. If you get bubbles in there, then you can just get a pin and poke the bubbles out, or pull them out of the glossy accents. Again, don't worry if it doesn't look symmetrical to you, or you want it to be shaped a little bit, because once this dries, then you can trim it. And then once it gets dry, we're going to add it and glue it onto the front of the basin. Now I want to show you how the fountain turned out. So if you look up here at the top, you see I've added another clay piece with a little brass bee in the center. And then you saw my fountain attached here, but now you see the spray coming out of the lion's mouth, and then you see these cascades coming out over the basin and into the pond. The pond is still drying, so when that dries it should be clear. And then I'm going to add, after that's done, I'm going to start adding in some lily pads and maybe a flower or two. And then if you look to each side here, you see I've got the pots mounted on these columns, and they're painted the same way as the pots. And then if you take a little look here to the side, you can see there's this little bracket holding an image of a statue, and that's on another collage sheet of mine. And then I'm going to turn this around some more and show you the longer part of the balustrade that has the marble technique on it. And then I'm going to turn it to the front here, and I'm going to show you that I've added a couple more clay pieces to kind of dress up the entrance to this. Okay, now I'm just going to show you how the rest of it is being put together. I'll be adding my benches here inside, and I'll glue those down. And then I've got another thing here. This is another one of the clay pieces. I made two of them for each side and glued them together, but before I did that, to make the area for this to go into, for this the white stamen to stick into, before I put them together, I came in and I sanded an opening right here. So I just sanded it until I got a good size opening, and I did that on each piece, and when I put the two pieces together, it ends up being a hole in between them, and that's what gives you the room to stick those in. And these will go on each side of the trellis, like that. and I'll be gluing those in place right here on the trellis. The backs of these will just attach there. And then the potted ladies growing out of their pots will go right in front as an entrance to the garden. And then I have these men who are from the collage sheet with a watering can, as you can see. Now the watering can will be on my blog as an image you can download along with the fish and the lily pads. And so I'll be attaching these men to the railing here, and they will be watering the ladies who are growing in the pots. It's like so. So that's the entire piece. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you got some ideas, even if you don't want to create the whole thing. Hopefully there are some things that will help you in other projects. And then of course there's stuff in here that could be a standalone project like these ladies. I could see these being placeholders instead of holding a butterfly. One, maybe it would hold a place card with somebody's name. They could be nice little gifts. You know, you could just do a fountain if you wanted to, something small on a smaller scale. And like I said earlier, be sure to hop over to the blog because you'll get the images if you want to use any of those. You can also see all my collage sheets and information about that. There's lots more detailed pictures, so if you need to kind of zoom in on some of these things and look at them in more detail. And then also all the supply lists that outline where I got all these products. Alpha Stamps is carrying pretty much everything here. And so that list will also be in my blog. So thank you and happy crafting.